Hello. I promise to be brief. Let me start by thanking the GMF for once again doing this in cooperation with the Cardozo Foundation. This is actually the second edition of Turbulent Democracies in the International System. The first one we held, if my memory serves me well, in September 2016. 3 months after Brexit, 2 months before the election of Trump. And I remember that I started my introduction in that event with an exclamation, interrogation mark, which was, what the hell is going on? Right? And I think we are more knowledgeable about what's going on nowadays, but we are pretty much in the same context. So this is basically the idea, is to resume the same kind of conversation that we had 2 years ago with more knowledge about the big trends in world affairs. And from a Brazilian perspective, in a very interesting point in history. What the hell is going on here? Lots of interrogation marks from our perspective. So I'll stop here and I'll turn the floor to either Bill or Ian. And then I will try to moderate the first and the second panel. Then we have lunch and the afternoon session, which will be in the format of a conference with Ambassador Thomas Shannon, Kyle Bild, and President Cardozo. So having said that, which one of you? Okay. Ian.
Sergio, thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, first of all, for hosting us here. It's great to be doing this again. I was thinking as you were describing this kind of mini project we've had, that it's great things are getting better, right, on all sides. Not really. And actually being in Brussels, I can also say there's also a European piece to this. It's not just that odd things are happening in the United States and in Brazil that we need to sort of decode. There's also an interesting European piece to this as well. And it's a really good opportunity to do that. You know, at GMF, our whole thing is transatlantic. I mean, for those of you who may not know us, we're, despite our name, actually American, not German, although we were founded with a gift from the German government to commemorate the Marshall Plan. And, you know, that's actually an interesting point, because part of what we're seeing is not just the turbulent democracies piece of this theme, but the international order piece of this theme too, which we're going to talk about as well, and all the things that are happening there. And I would say that's also, you know, producing some questions about what the hell is going on. So lots to talk about. We're really delighted to be able to do this here again. I'm really delighted, I should say, my colleague Bill McElhenney, and I'll give the floor to him, because he was really the, you know, kind of not only present at the creation, but in some ways has been the engine behind much of this. So again, our thanks to all of you, and we look forward to the discussion.
Before you talk, I failed to mention the sponsors of the annual program of seminars of the Cardozo Foundation, whose trademarks are exposed in the screens in my front and behind me. So, Bill.
So, Sergio, thank you for letting me abusar de sua gentileza and offer a few comments to frame our conversations later today. It's important because I think this is the most important of the 10 or 11 international meetings where the Fundação and GMF have partnered in one fashion or another over the last 5 years. And it's really interesting. A lot of what we're going to be talking about flows and was present in a long conversation you, Bernardo, and I had about 10 years ago. And I remember it very distinctly because we agreed about basically everything, and they're two very smart guys, so it was kind of gratifying from an ego point of view. Less gratifying was the fact that we were wrong about so much of it. But in three big general areas, we were right. We were right about how huge technological, economic, social, and cultural changes were about to collide in ways that would fundamentally change our societies and the international order and the global distribution of power, and require consequently new patterns of cooperation. And we were right about how unsustainable it would be for the US, which is now just a seventh of the global economy, with its own internal issues, to continue its traditional role as guarantor or enforcer of a global rules-based order, even though, paradoxically, the welfare of the United States depends on that order. And I think we were right about the need for rebalancing that would bring forward other high-capacity players and not just governments to help shape a system that would be effective in responding to new needs. And really that's been the impetus, as Ambassador Shannon will attest, that's been the impetus to almost or most of 2 decades of diplomatic outreach by the US to Brazil. So that was what we were right about. Where we were wrong, I think, was about the speed and the specifics of the disruption that was coming our way, the backlash to globalization, not in the least developed, but in the most developed countries, the potency of revived nationalism and tribalism in the most developed parts of the world. So suddenly today we find ourselves swimming in a lake full of black swans, like a US president as unconventional as much of his agenda is divergent from traditional understandings of American interests, or maybe even the values of most of its people, or Brexit, or the surge toward mainstream of extremist and authoritarian politics in a number of European countries and even the United States, or the way social media platforms were so easily weaponized cheaply and effectively by disruptors, foreign and domestic, with systemic consequences. And I think we've only seen the tip of that iceberg, even though we know icebergs are melting.
This is alarmism. This is climate alarmism.
And none of it is true. None of it is true, but we just have to say it. So, and then maybe most importantly, something we missed was the emergence of artificial intelligence as one of the most significant and unpredictable developments in the geopolitical space, potentially even a source of great power conflict. And so a big challenge now is how we manage, and we have to, and we will, how we manage our way into a benign future, and what are the key features of an order that can get us there and keep us there, and what are some of the biggest obstacles in terms of our own internal politics and international resistance as the number of veto players grows. And if we're in new territory today, we've been there before lots of times. We were there in the late 1940s when the foundations of the liberal international order took shape. In a lot of ways, the global rules-based order has always been a work in progress, and it's been about innovating and adapting with practical tools and rules and cooperation to secure our interest in a changing world and in rapidly evolving circumstances. And we made a lot of mistakes in the process, and it's always taken leadership that could make and remake the case to usually skeptical publics that it was all worth it. And that same dynamic is true today as that order is in flux. And some people even think it's in mortal danger. We all know that in our own countries, domestic politics complicates the picture even more. A lot of people see their national politics careening off in dangerous new directions that jeopardize our collective ability to sustain the kind of global system that our interests require. More and more people in the US believe that our own political class has already done more in recent decades to reduce popular confidence in liberal self-government than any single president possibly could. and that our top goal today needs to be rebuilding our own democracy in our own country, and that is crucial to our ability to help sustain any world order. There are a lot of signs, though, that rebuilding is already underway in the United States. The judicial battle lines are being drawn right now for an epic test of America's constitutional principles, and it may end up being a confrontation about the very nature of our democracy itself. In local politics, you see growing efforts across party and sector lines to make government more effective and cleaner, and grassroots groups are emerging with certain speed across the United States to combat the hyperpartisanship and divisiveness that have characterized discourse in the U.S. in the last few years. There's an analog to that process, too, obviously, in Europe and in Brazil right now. We need fresh thinking as well about the international order. The Harvard political scientist Graham Allison pointed out recently that local and systemic renewal does not require converting the Chinese or the Russians to American ideas about liberty, and it doesn't necessitate changing foreign regimes into democracies or trying to. Maybe for now it's enough to sustain a world order that's truly safe for diversity, a concept that President Kennedy talked about a lot during the last year of his life. Achieving that is going to take a surge of strategic imagination that goes far beyond conventional wisdom right now. But the historical progress of the modern West has always been about reaching far beyond the status quo. If we sense danger in the disruption that's coming, we should be able to also see the huge opportunity present in it. So another big question for us is how to harness in positive ways all of the energy and creativity that's going to be unleashed as the tectonic plates of world power shift. It's a hard question, admittedly, but maybe it's an existential one. And you can be optimistic or you can be pessimistic, but this is not a very good time to be fatalistic because the future is not predetermined. It's going to be shaped, and it is being shaped by the way multiple interests engage today. And we all do that in some way, whether we work for national governments or local governments or big companies or civil society, the media. We have to try to understand what's happening and determine our interests and coordinate and act, and collectively that can have a huge effect. And I offer up just one of many possible examples of that. 2 years ago, a new administration took office in the United States that was absolutely committed to ending the North American Free Trade Agreement. That catalyzed a wave of engagement from stakeholders all over the country, big and small, local governments, state governments, mayors, university presidents, economists, journalists, civic groups, even labor unions. And that activism and engagement based on real interest with some degree of coordination ultimately prevented something very, very damaging to our country from happening. And we need that kind of engagement today in Europe and South America and North America. So this is a great time and place and group to take up today's agenda. The Atlantic world in all its diversity shares foundations and values that most of us think are absolutely vital to the kind of future we want. And conversations like this are important to spur thinking about what's coming and how we can affect it. And in that sense, Sergio, I think FFHC and GMF are on the very sharp edge of history, and it's a great honor to be here today with such a distinguished group of colleagues. Thank you.